may seem sort of strange, but one of the things that we've been thinking about a lot as organic growers, for the first time in the last year or so, we have farmers and ag providers starting, this is not in direct response to your presentation, but starting to come together around mental health issues. Because one of the things I think that many of us who are close to the earth are experiencing for the first time is extreme grief. And I think those of us who are working day to day with these plants through drought, through stress, through whatever, I've really been struck by that recently. We're actually, NOFA is sponsoring on the 25th down in Fairfield County, we're sponsoring a farmer and ag provider mental health and suicide prevention gathering. And I think so often when we talk about these issues, we have to sort of face that growing reality of sort of what do I do with that weather data other than mourn it? So I just throw that out there as a response.
Really interesting.
And thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
I don't mean to say it's depressing,
but you mentioned that, and actually that's not, in India, where there are parts of India that are experiencing extreme drought over the course of many periods and they don't have resources to, reservoirs. Farmer suicide is an enormous, huge problem. A huge problem.
Problem in the United States.
In the U.S.
And in the U.S. too.
It's a growing problem in
But
the
the
U.S.
salinity over in India from the water disappearing is destroying, and arsenic in particular.
Yeah, right, and then you have buildup of arsenates. Yeah.
I mean, I think we owe that piece of this its due right now, is sort of to look together and say, hey, wait a second.
And farmers are experiencing, I work with arborists, tree care professionals, and most of the tree care professionals that I know, they got into this work, which is highly dangerous if they're doing tree care, because they love trees. And I'm always impressed by the that strong bond that they feel. And so the things that we're seeing with trees that most people in the public are just not sensitive to, they're feeling it really strongly. And when we have our meetings with the tree care people, the CTPA meeting, which is about 3,000 tree care people in Connecticut, although people from New York and Massachusetts come down, they're really all feeling the same sort of thing, stress, because they have clients who ask, fix my tree, and they don't have the toolboxes because we have not developed them, because we don't really know what's going on necessarily, or it's not a simple solution.
So I'm curious, given climate change and that it's going to continue and get worse, and so the variability of all the things that you guys have said, I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on the future of farming from the perspective of, do you think that there's going to be way more aquaponics, hydroponics, way more just growing under greenhouse where you can control the climate? And like enormous greenhouses, way beyond the scale we have now. So efforts to try to control climate, really, and control growing conditions either through the greenhouse or through aquaponics.
So can I actually, no offense, but can I table that question for the moment and come back to it, just to give the panelists an opportunity to react to what each other person was saying? Obviously, if you have nothing to react to, then yes, let's go to that question. But is that okay with everyone, or would we like to just address that?
We can table it.
Okay, we will definitely come back to it. That'll be the first question in our question area.
One thing that that was coming to my mind in thinking about the public health aspect and climate change and farming, an alarming article that I read, and I can't remember where I read it. I don't know if either of you have seen this, but with more carbon in the atmosphere, plants are actually, some annual plants are growing faster, which means they have less time to take up nutrients. So even though our plants might grow faster because they have more carbon in the atmosphere, they're less nutritively dense. And so that's upsetting to learn about that and see that with increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, our plants might grow faster, and these are like annual plants I'm talking about, but they might have less nutrient density. And I don't know if you've seen any of that research.
And so the hypothesis has been proposed for quite some time that, well, gee, maybe more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Obviously, plants can do nothing with methane, but I should probably stress out from it. But carbon dioxide is the building block of glucose, which is the building block of cellulose. And cellulose is what we want because cellulose is a slow to degrade molecule that locks carbon in places. Wood is a great carbon sink as long as it doesn't rot. But so research seems to suggest that you can only force so much carbon dioxide. You're not going to. It's not going to be proportional. The increase of photosynthesis, of the rate of photosynthesis, is not proportional. Plants can only use so much. So there is a little bit of an increase. I don't know if that's true about annuals, like vegetable plants, but one sobering other part of that is that the rate of photosynthesis starts to shut down at above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, plants become less effective unless they have a different kind of photosynthetic metabolism called C4, which we won't go into. But even there, it's not highly efficient. You'll notice that desert plants don't grow really fast, even though they got lots of sunlight, and water's limited, of course. But high temperatures, plants, their photosynthetic machinery starts to shut down. Partly because the stomate's closed to prevent loss of water, and if the stomate's closed, you can't have photosynthesis. So that's, to me, more of a concern than, I don't know about the relationship between the nutrition. I do know that over-fertilizing plants can lead to lower concentrations of various potentially nutritionally beneficial phytochemicals. But as far as carbon in the atmosphere, the thing about farming to me is that, as both of you know, when you're farming, you're taking land and putting it through this kind of cycle, a carbon cycle that is far more productive than, say, growing a lawn, which is not productive as a carbon sink. And so the more land we take and put through, especially by using practices like you're using, where you're mulching the ground, you're preventing loss, you're building up a carbon sink in your soil, that alone, in and of itself, is a way to mitigate against climate. None of us is individually going to solve climate change, but we all can do our part. That's kind of how I see it.
Can I comment on the nutritional density?
Becca might not let you.
I'm a big
thing may be a larger problem because a lot of us think we're getting great nutrition going to Whole Foods or wherever we're getting our food from, but after it's traveled across the U.S., sat on the shelf for a week, the nutritional density compared to what you're producing, Massaro's producing off of this, farmland, is night and day. They're not comparable anymore. So a lot of us, even though we have access to what we think is high quality food, with the soil degradation, with the speed of growth that's not allowing that nutritional uptake, with the storage and transportation, what we're eating in the end is almost similar to what those corner stores are putting out.
I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think it's something to really be wary of and be concerned about. And I think the nutrient density, like a carrot is not a carrot, is not a carrot. And
unless
so
you're the USDA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless you're the USDA that says like one carrot and this is X servings and X calories and this amount of vitamin A, but we know as farmers that a carrot produced in this soil is going to taste so much different from a carrot produced, even the same carrot in the same soil in a different year with drought. I mean, you see carrots are very they need water, and in a drought year they grow all funky, and they're not going to do what they need to do. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that, and that two carrots are not the same in terms of where was that produced, in terms of what the soil was like.
The research around nutrient density, I think, is sort of the growing edge of our work right now. One of the things that I always note at our place is that our farm has been continually in production since 1750. The land that I'm working in, like, wow, isn't that wonderful? And you look at the stone walls and you feel like you're part of history working the same land. until you realize that the land has been continually in production since 1750, and it is exhausted. And so with every carat that you take out of that soil, you're taking little trace amounts of boron, and it's really only now that we realize how essential it is to remineralize our soils. Many of us just think, oh, well, I have an organic garden, that means you add compost. You do, but all those other weird things, kelp and seashells and all of the other, and rock phosphates, all these things that we're sort of beginning to learn about in terms of creating nutritional density in food, are, I think, going to be a really exciting new change. And nutritional density, to my point at the beginning of my talk, cuts across organic, conventional, whatever, and it has to do with sort of the overall mineral and profile of your soil. So I think there is, I look forward to more and more work being done in that field.
When you said that about the forest with the only input being leaves, that second one is all our granite being decomposed, because without the minerals, we're lost.
Right.
Do you all have any other responses that you would like to give to each other?
I was really heartened by both of your presentations, and that is that I did my graduate work up at Cornell in Ithaca, and I was very involved and have been with food co-ops almost all my adult life. And there's always this push and pull among people who would have rather seen. I remember our food co-op in Ithaca was it's a big part of the community, and I was very active in it. And between those who said organically grown at all cost, regardless of where it comes from, and those of us who said, look, we'd rather support local farmers who are trying to get a farm going and have it be local than have everything imported from California or wherever. And it is a push-pull. And, you're not going to have organic farmers or even people trying to develop organic farms if they can't even get going. And so, but it's an interesting push-pull. And it was I was thinking about, like, with New Haven, even if the soils aren't perfect yet, at least you're growing food, and I would bet anything that given that we are burning our trash, and it looks like now with China not taking recyclables any longer, I kind of say that it shouldn't be reduce, reuse, recycle. It should be refuse, reduce. And I forget what
Refuse again.
Refuse again.
Reuse.
Reuse. Like recycling is not really what we should be thinking about as our primary way to reduce our impact. But keeping food waste out of the waste stream is really important. And so people who garden are more likely, statistically more likely, to compost. And by treating food waste that way, hopefully minimizing food waste, but then going through the composting cycle is far, far better than either burning it or having it sit in the landfill.
It's an immense resource that we're literally throwing away to have that carbon that we can put back into the soil.
Right.
So it's so important.
And so it's doubly bad that then you're going to, if you put it in a landfill, it breaks down anaerobically and produces methane, greenhouse gas. And if you burn it, it's going to release all kinds of greenhouse gases as well. So, but people who garden are more likely to take up composting. I mean, that's just, which is good. I mean, I'm sure that you,
I like the no-till part. I think that helps building up the soil structure, like you were saying. It's huge.
So, can we start off our question session with Mary's question about aquaponics and hydroponics? Do you want to repeat it at all, or?
I got it.
You guys got it?
Yeah.
Steel trap memories. Go for it.
I think it's already happening. I think that when you go into the supermarket now, just a regular Stop and Shop or Big Y, in the winter you're seeing tomatoes that are grown under glass. A lot of them are coming from Canada. Actually, Canada has invested, their Department of Agriculture has really invested a lot in glass greenhouse production. It's coming into the U.S. as well. There's a farm in Maine that you'll see throughout New England sold in Stop and Shop called Backyard Farms, and they have, I want to say, like 90 acres under glass, in in production in northern Maine. And so I think it's already happening. I think farmers are realizing that to be profitable in New England growing tomatoes, most people are doing some type of hybrid in greenhouse. And so I think that is happening already. People are realizing that you need to have a climate that's a little bit more stabilized. And I think I am a soil-based farmer. I believe in that because I do. But I do think that hydroponic and aquaponic is going to have some place in our future if we're going to feed 9 billion people on this planet. So I'm curious what your kind of thoughts are.
I've been struggling. I'm not a huge fan of hydroponics. I like the dirt. I think it's also been really, there's been a huge sort of rift now in the organic community around hydroponics. The USDA has just allowed for the certification, the organic label to be put on stuff that is grown in a styrofoam shell in a slurry of chemicals. That's now organic in this country because that's what hydroponics is. And so the organic community has then suddenly gone to the mat over this and said, wait a second, we're about carbon and safe soils and biodiversity, and that's not happening. And not that there is anything wrong with hydroponic growing, it's just not what we have used this label to generate. So again, I'm not a hydroponics person. God bless them. They're farming. They're producing food. Fantastic. To the hoop house question, or the high tunnel, the greenhouse, whatever. I am struggling a little bit with trying to. I get that question a lot. What's farming going to look like when I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old? How are they going to do this in 40 years, 50 years? How are my grandchildren going to do it? And one of the things I've noted, we have 5 different small hoop houses and plastic-covered greenhouses on our farm. Every year, what we're facing is that, yes, we can control the climate, but simultaneously I'm putting my annual salary in a plastic bubble under a couple metal ribs, and these storms that are coming through are statistically wiping out our greenhouses. The NRCS funded the building of all these high tunnels, and the superstorms are knocking them all down. We had a windstorm a couple of weeks ago that blew off a 30 by 70 foot sheet off one of our greenhouses. It was just a simple spring windstorm, but they're getting extreme. And so I wonder, in the face of extreme swings in climate, whether we're going to really be as safe as we think we are growing in these little bubbles. So I'm not sure that I'm yet willing to put all of my eggs in that basket. In Canada, a lot of the tomatoes that Jacqueline was talking about, they're actually growing them in the mines, the abandoned mines underground. And they say it's a lot cheaper to go 500 feet underground where the climate is stable. And just turn on grow lights. The electricity is cheaper than the heat above ground. So they're actually growing these massive fields of food in the abandoned nickel mines.
And using LEDs, which are much lower in
so there's weird stuff that's going to come down the line. And they can bring the soil down, they can bring everything and just sort of create a subterranean, so I think there's going to be some out there kind of stuff like that. But my response is always to look, again, to sort of take those walks in the woods and to look at the plants that how we are going to sort of breed resilience into the plants in our local ecologies, and that resilience will help us learn something about how to handle these changes as they come. So we, and Connecticut NOFA, and then we, Dina, at the Hickories, Mike, switching of hats, are working a lot more on trying to find the local, hyper-local varieties of plants in our native plant profile, and collect seeds on those and grow those out for homeowners, for everybody. The Connecticut NOFA supports this OLC, the Organic Land Care program, and those are landscapers, lawn guys, whomever, who are also being trained to find the native plants and put them back into your yard. Most of the invasives that we're facing are threatening our ecology, and the threat that they pose, and I'm sure you can speak to this as well, will only make the effects of climate change more dramatic for us. So I think sort of holding a line around native plants, in particular insects and pollinator habitats, is going to be an important part of sort of building the raft that gets us through some of this stuff.
And I think some of the resiliency comes in taking personal ownership of it. And so I think that if people are taking more responsibility and growing their own food and knowing where that food is coming from, and thinking about, oh, can I grow this at my house, and really working with each other in our communities to grow more food locally. And I think New Haven Farms has really opened my mind as someone who was farming more like traditionally in fields where the soil was there, and you can grow food anywhere and organically with soil, native soil. We do bring in soil from outside of New Haven due to some contamination issues in urban areas, but we grow a lot of food in an urban area. And so I think opening people's minds to where food can be produced, I think is going to go a long way. It's not going to solve the issue of feeding 9 billion people, but it certainly can help. So
Can I make a comment? I just have a quick comment. First of all, I want to say, as a non-science person, I loved your stories because you helped me understand the process, and that's very cool because I don't have the brain like you know what I'm saying? So I like when it gets broken down into something I get that. Okay, leaves, I get that. I said to her, we should put our leaves in our garden. That's what we should do. But anyway, and as far as the work, I worked in nonprofits in Connecticut with minorities, and I think the work you're doing is wonderful. It's about citizenship as well, and I don't mean immigration citizenship. I mean belonging, being part of a community.
Yeah.
You can see it on their faces, the enthusiasm. It's great work. It's wonderful to give people the opportunity to learn how to take care of themselves, and that does volumes of change.
and take care of our neighbors.
And take care of each other and be a part of something. And I appreciate the weather data as much as I could get of it. So thank you.
Doom and gloom.
No, I got it, but I got most of it. You lost me at the end, but I got most of it. It's good.
I got a couple of comments. First, for Jacqueline, your presentation, I thought that the slide you had of the USDA slide, the corn slide showing the amount of food availability to people, was telling. That was a USDA slide because they support so much corn
Because it's
production.
corn. I know. I thought about that, but I was
No,
in a
but the next
rush.
slide was diabetes. You had your corn syrup slide followed by the diabetes slide.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting. You have the USDA approach versus the CDC approach.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. Your last slide was showing your the logos of your supporters. You left off Greater New Haven Green Fund, which I'm on the board, so I really appreciate you putting us back on there. We've
I
supported
hope we
a
get
lot.
our grant this year then.
Well, we've already supported you, so if we don't see the logo on there, I'm on the grants committee too, so.
What about?
But no, we do a lot of support of food programs in New Haven. You guys are one of the ones.
Yeah, thank you.
So is Massaro. And just my other hat that I wear besides the Greater New Haven Green Fund, I'm a Connecticut Master Gardener. And talk about encouraging people to grow food, and just wanted to put it out there to people that there's a great resource in Connecticut with the UConn Extension Office. You call either become a Master Gardener yourself, take the class, runs January through April, or call the office and contact the Master Gardeners if you have questions about how to help either with gardening at home, with plants, with native plants, with insect pollinators, whatever it may be. We support the whole gamut, not just vegetables, fruits, landscaping, whatever. So it's a great resource. We work closely with the Ag Extension Office, for support, and so there's a lot of resources available to help grow food locally. And just to the one other comment about the nutritional quality of food, one thing that's readily available to everybody are weeds, and there are we eat about a dozen of them, different plants that are readily available. They're weeds, right? And they're probably they've been proven to be more nutritious than the stuff you're getting in Whole Foods and organic section. So
Speaking of nutritional density.
right.
Yeah.
So
I
eat weeds. I mean, that's
eat the weeds. I had a funny story along those lines.
Not all of them, though. Some of them.
I had a moment very early on in my farming career where I was trying to get in the last planting of salad greens. Man, whoever invented salad mix. But and it's so much work to produce it, and it's so hard. It's such an annoying crop, and I had to get the last one in. And the bed that I was planting had been grown over with purslane, which is this sort of noxious weed that gets. So I first started like,
Tastes good, though.
I started ripping out all this purslane, and our farm is called the Hickories, and we had this hickory tree over the bed that had sort of dumped all of its nuts on the bed. So I was raking off all these nuts and then ripping out all the purslane so I could plant a whole bunch of lettuce that has basically like no nutritional value whatsoever. And there's the earth being like, here you go. And what can I do but like get it all out of my way so I can plant, you know. And it's just one of those sort of moments where I remember thinking, man, like who's fooling who? Yeah. I can just get
We
people
sell our purslane to a restaurant in New Haven for like $16 a pound.
We put it in our
Awesome.
CSA.
Yeah. But I appreciate what you said about that, because it's true.
It
Frequently
does.
you'll find yourself weeding next to something and you're like, wait, what has more nutritional value? And it's probably the lamb's quarters, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 'Cause
Absolutely.
they've adapted to be in that area.
Yeah.
And so, but we're lacking the knowledge in our communities, and so sharing that knowledge with people is so important.
We learned about edible weeds here at a similar talk at the library, I don't know, 10, 15
Wonderful.
years
They're
ago.
great.
And,
They're great.
and,
Yeah.
and you used to be like, wow, I used to pull the purslane all the time, same things, like all
Yeah.
this purslane everywhere.
Delicious.
Now we weed around the purslane and like, you know,
It was
let the other
brought
stuff.
here by Europeans
Yeah.
for that
Yeah.
for that
For that
reason. I
reason.
mean, unfortunately, these are all invasives. Not all, but I mean, I don't think you're going to eat mugwort.
You can.
Don't.
I
You
know
can- well, you can
but
make a
it is
tea.
really a bad.
Yeah,
It's environmentally really damaging.
Yes, that's horrible.
Yeah.
You need to just get rid of it. It's
Yeah.
Bun Light out of Bios has just put a thing up today. He's going to use the Japanese knotweed.
We put that in our CSA
It's
last
really
year.
good,
Yeah, it
yeah.
can be good. It can be good.
You eat the tubers, right? Or the young.
The
shoots.
little
shoots.
The
that
shoots,
start in
yeah.
spring,
Wild.
Can I want to expand off of Mary's question. So we know like the Netherlands and Israel and then I guess Canada are really investing a lot in greenhouse architecture. Like, isn't that kind of working against the carbon sequestration, the energy usage?
I think
know
it
it's
is.
the ability to make nutritional. I wouldn't even go. I'm not a fan of greenhouse grown food. It always seems to be less vigorous than the stuff outdoors. But so nutritional density, I'm not sure how it comes out. I've never really looked into that, but I would imagine with the amount of energy, the amount of inputs, how many plastic films are we going to replace on this because of wind?
Right.
I'm not sure where the equation lays. I know that part with NOFA, or not NOFA, the National Organics approving the hydroponics, and now factory farms, you know,
CAFOs are all
these
these.
inside of skyscrapers are going to be producing organic salad greens.
I mean, they may
under-
be part of the solution. They're just
Yeah,
not.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
what I call it.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently there are some abandoned buildings in New York City where they're using LEDs, and you know,
Yeah.
there you have a climate control, just a building that is naturally climate controlled. And if you can produce food that's going, because with 9 billion people, we are going to become more urbanized just by necessity.
Right.
Because the people on this planet with the smallest carbon footprints are people who live in densely in cities. That's just a fact. That's not a judgment, that's a fact. And, you know, how do you get food to these people? Well, you could
I
design.
still think that's debatable, because a lot of these grasslands, a lot of these forest lands, that's where our carbon sinks are. And there was one of those memes up there, you know, so these people live in here and it shows all the skyscrapers and the blacktop asphalt, the rooftops that are black, are gonna tell us how we're supposed to be living, and they're showing their green
I don't think anybody's
pastures
telling
and-
anybody how to live, but I think if you actually calculate all of, when you look at the miles
Per
of roads that
capita.
are put in, yeah,
Yeah.
that just the carbon cost of living in a city where you're not using a car, big, where you're living in much smaller square footage of space, which is another huge contribution to your carbon footprint.
Right.
And then of course balance that against that your food is coming from longer distances, although that seems to be a small amount of what adds up to your carbon footprint. They do have the smallest carbon footprint, but
Right.
the reality is that, you know, if we're going to go from 6 billion to 9 billion people on this planet by 2050,
Very quickly,
where are all these people going to live? Not everybody can have a house in Vermont. I mean, you know.
There is some, you know, heartening stuff happening now, I think, around, particularly in agriculture, around the way that we look. I mean, this question of how are we going to feed the planet, right? That's always sort of looming. And there's some really interesting, I think, paradigm shifts happening where instead of the USDA has only historically ever gauged pounds per acre as production, how many bushels per acre of corn, how many, and so yield has always been the number that people turn to when they talk about how are we going to feed the world. It's yield per acre. there are new ways of thinking that are actually calculating nutrition per acre and saying how many pounds of food, but how much nutrition can we produce per acre? And suddenly the scales shift, and small scale organic agriculture in highly diversified situations, all that kale and sweet potatoes, and suddenly those outpace however many hundreds of acres of corn syrup it may take.
In permaculture, if you don't have as many inputs, you would think, with, like you're
Because of the inputs.
Yeah, you're
Corn
adding
is
more organic
huge.
to your farm every year, right?
So I think this question of like where there's no way we could feed the world on small family farms, I put that to the real test. I think that we have not yet begun to really look at a level playing field around how to feed the world. Right.
Yeah.
To use those new measurements that you're talking about?
The work is largely coming out of India. There's a woman there, Vandana Shiva, who is producing a tremendous amount of sort of recalibration of farm statistics around nutrition per acre, not yield per acre. Yeah.
I think one thing that we haven't really mentioned much in this conversation is advocacy and the policy side of things, because coming back to your point about the slide with the corn, when we think about how many millions of acres in this country are under corn production and that we're losing topsoil because of the additions that we're putting in there, and we're growing this corn to produce sugar or to produce ethanol for our cars, and we're not subsidizing food, we're subsidizing sugar, and we're paying for this as tax. Our tax dollars are going to subsidize that. We don't provide crop insurance for vegetables. That's a specialty crop. Vegetables are labeled a specialty crop through the USDA. Yeah, it's hilarious. Like, this is just,
it's really
sick.
topsy-turvy.
Yeah, and so, yeah,
and
so,
soybeans. And when you think about that, because corn is a very depletive, very, very depletive, and the inputs of nitrogen, and a lot of that nitrogen is derived from fossil fuel.
Yeah.
So the inputs are just enormous. And most corn production, as you're saying, does not feed, people don't eat corn. It's sugar and it's ethanol. And soy, most of the soy that's grown here is not for tofu. I mean, it's mostly going to animal, to CAFOs. And CAFOs are combined animal feeding operations, if anybody doesn't know, but that, and that is an enormous, that acreage